Welcome back, Nerd Squad, the Top 10 Nerd. I'm your host with the most, Johnny Rogers. If you happen to be new here, we are a nerd-centric channel specializing in top 10 lists, brought to you by the most dynamic and nerdy hosts on the interwebs. So to never miss another video, tap that subscribe button and leave us a comment down below with which one of the X-Men's powers that you'd love to have, and you know what, tell us why. Now while you ponder that, let's jump into today's list of the top 10 X-Men who can't die. Except, don't think of this video of people who can't die, more so members of the X-Men who just can't seem to stay dead. In at number 10, Deadpool.
There's gotta be some way to die. I just need to die harder. Trademark Fox. Y'all caught up now?
Now while it's still disputed as to whether or not Deadpool is an official member of the X-Men, but his involvement with Colossus and the fact that he's actually stayed at Xavier's school is enough for us to include him on this list. With a healing factor that would make Wolverine jealous, Deadpool puts his immortality to full use in not only the films but the comic books as well. Aside from the multiple suicide attempts, Deadpool has been the victim of decapitation and dismemberment several times. People such as Carnage, the Hulk, and even Wolverine have all done their best to separate the merc from his mouth. The story of how Deadpool gained his immortality is really interesting though. When Thanos discovers that Wade is in love with the literal personification of death, Thanos curses Deadpool with the inability to die, just so the two can't be together. Thanos was so jealous of Deadpool he accidentally made him immortal. In at number 9, Archangel. The story of Warren Worthington coming back is a little bit of a strange one, but regardless it's an X-Men death and rebirth, just not the rebirth that we were expecting per se. In the storyline, when the Archangel personality takes over Warren and actually attempts to take over the role of Apocalypse, the rest of the X-Force gets pretty worried, and rightfully so I should add. Anyone who wants to become Apocalypse should be watched closely, but a threat like that for the X-Force meant they needed to terminate Warren. And at the end of it all, it's Psylocke who delivers the execution by stabbing Warren with the life seed. Ultimately, this kills the Archangel, although not for long. As the team is retreating, they spot Warren trudging through the deep snow, except now he's been returned to his original form. However, it's not the same old Warren by a long stretch. This version was almost a blank slate. When he was stabbed with the life seed, it completely erased everything that Warren knew before his death. Later on, this more pure version of Warren is merged again with the Archangel clone, which may be seen as a technicality for some, but for us it's pretty much a resurrection of the original. In at number 8, Nightcrawler. Kurt Wagner's story of rebirth is really touching and speaks to the genuine character that Nightcrawler is. During the Second Coming storyline, Nightcrawler and Rogue were alone fighting against Bastion. Both of their intentions were to protect Hope Summers from the Super Sentinel, and as such they laid it all on the line. When Rogue went down, Kurt attempted to teleport her to safety, yet in the moment that he was about to do that, Bastion stuck his hand through Nightcrawler. So when they arrived on Utopia, he just had Bastion's hand sticking out of his chest and as a result slowly died from his injuries. But when Nightcrawler's soul rose to the heavens, he still continued his good deeds, helping them drive out evil whenever it reared its ugly head in the oasis of heaven. When Kurt's father chose to abuse their connection to attack heaven, Kurt took the opportunity to rematerialize his body back to Earth. But as a result, he had to turn over his own soul. Sure, he was able to return to the land of the living, but now he will never be able to return to heaven. In at number 7, Gambit. Gambit has always been one of my favorite X-Men characters, and therefore I was as happy as can be to mention that the Raging Cajun just won't stay down. In the 2012 17 issue Gambit Solo, the finale saw Gambit perfectly pulling off a prison riot which brought together not only his target, but the British intelligence MI13 and the Uncanny Avengers. As you can imagine, these groups coming together created quite the mess, and while his friends were picking up after him, the heroes actually lost track of the mob boss. The target ended up getting his hands on a gun and delivered a fatal shot to the head of Gambit. With Gambit now lying dead in the arms of Rogue, a member of the MI13 used the magic of Excalibur to reconstruct Gambit's blown apart head, which ended up bringing Gambit back to life and offered up a terrific line of dialogue where Gambit says, "Why do I feel like the day after Mardi Gras?" That's what Mardi Gras feels like. I don't want to go. In at number 6, Jubilee. Jubilee's death and rebirth stories are perhaps some of the coolest storylines out there. Her storylines have seen the hero die more often than the rest of the X-Men characters, but the first was perhaps the most unforgettable. After the House of M, Jubilee and many of the other X-Men had their powers basically turned off as they were captured by the Purifiers. Without their powers, they became easy targets for their enemies. The Purifiers beat them relentlessly and ended up crucifying them on the front lawn of the X-Mansion. Talk about a grudge. By the time that help arrived, they were all essentially dead. However, when Wolverine carried Jubilee to the sub-basement of the X-Mansion and gave her a blood transfusion from Angel, the restorative properties of the blood brought life back into her. In at number 5, Rogue. After the events of Avengers vs. X-Men, Rogue fully believed that the Scarlet Witch was going to cast another spell, so she decided to take care of it herself. To do this, she absorbed Wolverine's powers and ran through the Avenger with her new bone claws. Although what she didn't see coming was supervillain the Grim Reaper sneaking up behind her and stabbing Rogue in the back. Her death, while lasting for a few months, was eventually reversed when the Avengers went back in time to stop her first attack on the Scarlet Witch. Classic Avengers just turning back the clocks whenever they don't like when something plays out. Either way, it brought Rogue back into our lives, so I guess it's cool. In at number 4, Colossus. The story of Colossus dying and then coming back to life is every bit tragic as it is remarkable. When Peter's brother died, he felt it was his duty to find the cure for the legacy virus. Although the only way to make the cure airborne was to have the cure injected into a living person for whom it would ultimately kill. Colossus, though, decided this was a sacrifice that he needed to make and chose to inject himself with the cure. This is also the moment that Colossus went from looking human to altering his state into that steel form that we saw him as in the Deadpool films. Years after the run of Astonishing X-Men, a cure of the mutant disease was being developed, but all the X-Men knew was that it was being tested on an unknown subject. When the X-Men arrived to investigate, they soon find out that Colossus has been alive this whole time. He was being held against his will in an underground bunker, and a clone had been put in his place, which would be easy to do if you look like a robot. In at number 3, Cyclops. Scott Summers has actually died twice, but the first was more so the end of the life that he had known up until that point. Allow me to elaborate. During the 12 storyline, Cyclops had become a host for Apocalypse. Apocalypse at it again. And after being freed by the tyrant, Cyclops believed he was dead from the whole thing. But it was only that part of him that had died. Thankfully, Jean and Cable were able to remove Apocalypse from their friend to restore him back to his normal state. Well, as normal as can be. In the second death of Cyclops, we have to jump to Secret Wars 2. These strange mist clouds at the time were kind of floating around, and they were there to sterilize and ultimately kill the mutants all around the world. And one of its victims was Scott Summers. In a recent time travel storyline though, a younger version of his son Cable used a pinch of the Phoenix Force to turn the tides on Cyclops' fate. This ultimately resurrected his father and allowed him to crawl out of his grave. In at number 2, Jean Grey. The death of our beloved Jean Grey has been teased several times throughout the comic books. It gives us a heart attack every single time. But the real death came at the hands of a Magneto clone. A former X-Man himself actually poisoned Jean with a hefty dose of electromagnetism. Although because Jean had fully merged with the Phoenix Force, she was able to bring herself back several times. One of the more important cases of this remanifestation was in the Avengers vs. X-Men storylines. Jean returns to save a power-hungry Cyclops from perishing and also finally makes her full return using the Phoenix Force. However, in the end, she decides to reject this cosmic force and live the rest of her life without it. Lastly, on our number 1 spot, Wolverine. As I mentioned before, Wolverine has some pretty crazy regenerative abilities, but when the miniseries titled Death of Wolverine was released, we all feared his abilities wouldn't be enough this time around. In the miniseries, Logan's healing properties were weakened by a virus, and word of his now diminished state spread rampant throughout the villain community and essentially put a big target on his hairy back. After discovering who was responsible for the virus, Wolverine was covered in this molten adamantium, and as the metal hardened, poor Logan ended up suffocating to death. Although other versions of him remained, this particular Wolverine was resurrected with the help of an Infinity Stone. In the hunt for Wolverine, a group of Reavers track down Logan's body, and what they find though is just the hardened shell of Logan with nothing inside. You see, the X-Men were able to extract his body from the statue using Kitty Pryde's phasing powers. His body was actually buried somewhere else, but we soon saw him alive and well holding the Space Stone for some reason. Little to no explanation as to how exactly he crawled out of the grave, but nonetheless we're happy to see him again. And that has been the top 10 X-Men who can't die. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, show us some love by tapping that like and subscribe button. Plus, leave us a comment down below with your thoughts on this list. And for more videos like this one, all you gotta do is click that playlist flashing on your screen. From Top 10 Nerd, I'm Johnny Rogers. Until next time, take care.